there should be some sort of noise now. Alrighty, please take us away.
You know my name, it's Mimi Abramovitz. I'm just a month retired from Silverman School of Social Work and the CUNY Graduate Center, which is the home of our PhD program. So I taught both. I taught social policy to master's and PhD students for many, 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 many years. I loved every minute of it, which is why I'm interested in talking with you all. And I hope I'll say more about this later, but I hope someone would like to become part of your group in some way, in some ongoing way, and not to advise you or but to listen. I'm very interested in what's happening with doctoral students in general around the country. And if there's any way I could be a fly on the wall, I would appreciate that. But we can talk more about that later. You could think about it. Someone mentioned University of Michigan. That's where I got my BA. Bachelor's in sociology, and I got my master's and doctorate at Columbia School of Social Work, where I specialized in community organizing. Now, when I actually took a double major in what they call then psychiatric social work, which we call casework now, or different names, because I had never heard of community organizing until community organizing was fairly new in social work education, and I knew nothing about social work education. So whatever I had heard about it, that was never mentioned. And at that point, it really appealed to me because I was active. I was active in the civil rights movement at that time, and so I said, "Oh, I could do that in social work too." So, and that's today they introduce me as a scholar and an activist, because I do both, and I'm very happy and proud, and will continue to be doing that. I do have a background in not only civil rights, but the labor movement and the women's rights movement. I was a union organizer on and off for several years, both at Yale University, where I lived in New Haven for many years. And when I was part of the women's movement, we took on Yale University, we being a faculty, staff union. It wasn't faculty, it was a staff union. And it was called the Yale Non-Faculty Action Committee, and eventually affiliated with District 65, which was a New York-based union, but it wasn't just New York, but that's how I knew it. And we took that to an election. We lost, but we lost by the smallest margin of all the District 65 efforts to move into universities. They have now moved further in and have done better, but they were suffering from globalization, which was shutting down their base, which was small retail shops. And they were being that production was being exported abroad. So I believe, just one of my philosophies is I believe that social movements are a major force for social change. And in fact, we've had years between the New Deal and 1975, we've had, when social movements were active, we had expansion of the welfare state, reduced poverty, reduced income inequality, and so on. And since then, with the rise, I don't know how familiar you are with the term neoliberalism, it's becoming quite common, but so good, I'm glad you're shaking your heads. So with that, I say that those policies have tried to undo the New Deal. And so a lot of my work has been, in the past 10 or 15 years, was about understanding the paradigm shift in the welfare state of what I just told you, and using economic crisis theory, which really helps me understand why this shift took place. And the second thing I've been doing is one of the major strategies of neoliberalism, in addition to budget cuts and tax cuts, is privatization. And so I began to look at privatization, not Social Security and entitlements, which we hear about, but privatization within human service organizations, which is called managerialism, which is a term we picked up from Europe, where they use that word a lot, or new public management. It's basically focusing on productivity, efficiency, bringing the business model into the organization. So I'm so glad you're all shaking your heads, because 2 years ago, no one would have heard about this. So I say that because it's taking a long time for these concepts, whether it was for me or anyone else, to get traction in social work. Social workers tend to be focused on a more narrow range, but you all seem to be, like me, more organizers than macro. So that's probably why you know about this. So though I've retired, and then I've also been very involved in all the macro organizations. I'm a long-term member of ISP. I'm a member of ACOSA. Do you know about ACOSA? The association, you should join that too. The Association for Community Organizing and Social Action. It's more of a community. It sort of started out with growing out of the community organizing committee, while ISP grew out of the policy practice community. But go online, it's not expensive to join, and they put out a great newsletter that it alerts people to what's going on in the macro community. And then there's the Special Commission to Advance Macro Practice, which you may or may not heard of. We can talk about that more later, but and ISP works with all these organizations. We all work together. Sometimes we call ourselves Macro United, because we're all small and we try to make ourselves bigger by joining forces. It's worked. And the main thing I'm doing now, that's taking most of my time, is I'm the co-chair of Voting is Social Work, the National Social Work Voter Mobilization Campaign. And as you can imagine, we're very focused on the midterms, but also 24. But my major focus in this, since I'm a macro person, is everyone else knows what to do on the ground. I know what to do on the ground. So I decided to talk about threats to democracy. And that's sort of my what I like to bring to the discussion, because if you do ranked choice voting or other electoral reforms and people don't honor your vote, it doesn't make any difference. And I think that social workers are still on an uphill learning curve in terms of even understanding that there is this threat, or if it is, they don't pay much attention to it because it's too scary or they're not interested. So anyway, I gave you some of my philosophy so you could know a little bit about me. It's probably more than you bargained for, but now I'll open myself up to your questions. And if I think of something else I want to add about myself, I had a long life, so I can't remember everything on the top of my head. It's an open field. You can ask, I know Josh was going to ask me some questions, but if they don't have any, Josh, you have some ready to start with.
Can I ask a question? Am I allowed to? Do you want me to raise my hand or put it in the chat, or can I just talk?
No, just ask. Raise your hand so Josh knows that someone wants to talk.
Oh, I raised my hand in the, sorry.
Yeah, that's
I mean, everyone has their video up, so if you do that.
Anyway, it's a very small group.
So can you talk about the threats to democracy? What I think.
Sure, that'll take our whole hour, so I'll try to be.
Well, I guess I'm sort of curious your thoughts. So there's a case before the Supreme Court in October. I guess this month is we're reaching up to October, that they're going to decide on states putting the rights back to states. I mean, how concerned are you?
Well, yeah, I am terrified. I feel like if social work doesn't pay attention to this, we might as well throw our hands up in the air. And I'm worried about the country, but I'm also in the world for that matter. Just look at Italy and England and current elections.
Yeah.
But I'm also worried about our field, because it's very hard to get most social workers, as you may know, to pay attention to these big macro issues. We should talk about macro in social work before we get off the phone, because that's a big important part I think you're interested in. We want to know more about it, how it feels to be a macro person in social work and so on. So what I usually talk about, I can send Joshua my PowerPoint, and I'm glad to share.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But I started out talking about voter suppression, and then I started adding what they call voter subversion. And what you're talking about is, they don't use that term so much. Someone used it one time and I liked it because it kind of summarized and goes beyond voter suppression. Now, voter suppression, as some people are now saying, people are maybe willing to stand in line for 8 hours. So there's a way to work around it, very unpleasant. But what you're talking about is the structural weakening of our democratic election process. And So there is this new, I just was reading about something state theory, something legislative state theory, something that we're trying to settle, excuse me, settle law which says that the states have ultimate right over all decision making, which I guess undermines this federal government, the courts and everything else. But, and then there's also, so there's that, there's the, all the appointments that have been made to election deniers. So these are all parts of the same package of subversion. They're basically trying to subvert the election process. And I forget the numbers now. In my PowerPoint, I have some of the numbers of the number of states that have already passed laws or are trying to pass laws along in both of these areas. And then when I watch the news every night, you hear new stories about what's happening, secretaries of states, governors, and the 40%, 35 to 40% of the people who still believe that the election was lost, that Biden lost the election. I'll say one other thing, which is even a little scary. I happened to watch the PBS had a very interesting series on the US role in the Holocaust. Any of you see it? Wait, you should stream it if you can, because it's not the general Holocaust. I didn't watch it so much because of the Holocaust. Well, I didn't know why I watched it. It just sounded interesting. But it was the emphasis on the US role. And what you see in this movie is what I'm worried about. And that's why I'm bringing it up. Because, well, first of all, Hitler was elected in 1933 and World War II ended in 1945. So it was a very short time before he took control of the world and the concentration camps and all the horrors that go with fascism. So we're in a short period like that maybe now, maybe not the fascism, but people on television, mainstream commentators are talking about fascism today. I don't like to use that word because it's so polemic, but people are starting to use it. And it shows how slowly, what the US did was, everyone knows they didn't let it, there was one ship that came with refugees and he didn't let them in, but there was more than that. And there was Roosevelt, our buddy, kept saying, well, we'll get the perpetrators. And they weren't talking to, which meant they weren't, which was later, and the people who were dying on the spot. So they were very worried about that. Anyway, it's a long story, but if you're worried about authoritarianism or even fascism, it's a lesson to be learned. And I can't help but think that it was released now because of that, because I know Ken Burns was working on it for a long time.
My friend of mine was just talking about that. She had just watched and said it's fascinating because there was like a 10-year wait to get into the country before, you know, because as things are starting to, you know, happen in Europe and people were realizing they needed to leave, they couldn't come here because the wait was so, we kind of put a hold on people coming in.
Well, we stopped them. It was
Yeah.
Roosevelt, the other thing that happened here, which is interesting to me, you know how when debates take place, the conservative ideological points win, and then the Democrats in this case are afraid to lose the vote of those people who might believe them. So Roosevelt came from a patrician background. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in his background, but he, largely due to his wife, moved away from that, appointed many Jewish people to his cabinet and so on. But they were afraid to look too sympathetic to the Jews, the same way Democrats are afraid to look too sympathetic. So what's so interesting about that is that this is a well-known playbook that happens. So it's not just, it's happening here and it's terrible, it's happening in lots of places. And there are people who wrote How Democracies Die, How Civil Wars Start. There are books that are, and every night on television, they interview someone who wrote another book on this stuff. So anyway, it's a long discussion. I'll stop here because maybe there are other things you want to talk about. But I hope that, and if you remind me, Josh, either before or after, I'll send you my PowerPoint.
Thank you.
Oh, and I just wanted to add, there's a YouTube series I watched called The Alt-Right Playbook. And it's very, they draw a lot from the lessons of fascism. And so a lot of what you're quoting is, I guess, like what I've heard from that. And yeah, it's just crazy to think about. I guess, is there anyone that has any other questions about?
I thought that maybe some of what you wanted to talk about was your dissertations and how to manage yourself in a doctoral program. So I'm happy to talk about that too, even though I started out on this lofty plane. So either way, whatever you want. I mean, if I can't answer it, I won't.
I guess I would have a question. Do you have any advice on how to get like macro social work practice experience during your PhD program?
Well, you don't have an internship, so
Yeah.
what do you mean? You mean like have a job or a research assistant or something like that?
Something, yeah. So I don't have post MSW work experience. I went straight into the program after my master's. And so I am just kind of wondering if there are like macro oriented jobs out there that I could have like on the side sort of during this program to just get some experience in
Well,
macro social work.
Well, macro social work is going to be, well, I don't know. I think, first of all, I don't when I was in the PhD program, I discouraged people from working if they didn't have to, because you don't have time. The best experience you can get is go in depth in your studies.
Okay.
So, I mean, you don't spread yourself too thin. Many people have jobs, families, they're in mid-careers. And I know I taught, my students had 4 classes a day and 4 months a semester, 4 papers, I mean, they couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
So I think the best way to do it is I would join the listservs of these organizations so get a feel of what's going on, join them, maybe come to the conferences and then, study your topic, spend time get a broad view on your topic, and then make sure it becomes a good macro topic. Then you can learn how to do macro research and explore a policy area. And that'll do you in very good stead. No one expects a PhD student to pick up practice skills.
So, but most of the job postings that I've seen, like they require like the 2 years of experience. And I'm just over here like, is my GA like the research experience that I'm gaining through that? Is that going to count? Like, am I even gonna
It's hard
get
to
a job interview?
Difference. They have that rule. They don't always enforce it. It depends on what kind of match you are with the program, where you are. What year are you in? Are you just starting?
Second year.
Yeah, I would just devote your time to worry about, if you need some experience, you can get it while you're doing it. You can have a lot of time while you're doing a dissertation when you're not in classes.
Okay.
Another time to take a part-time job. Maybe you could be, your experience, see, they want macro experience. They really want practice experience. I know at my school, they want to hire people with practice experience. But then the problem is many people who have practice experience are weaker in their research experience because they come practitioners, and then the schools want researchers. So they don't always shine as well in those job interviews because their research skills presentation isn't as strong. And in this day of age of managerialism, research trumps practice, which is not necessarily a good thing. So become a strong researcher, get good reviews on your articles, do some interesting qualitative or quantitative research. And some of you can disagree with me if you want, but this is just my impression after watching the field, that if you have a part-time job, that means you can't do what you're doing. And
yeah.
So develop skills, and you'll have to negotiate around that when the time comes. I wouldn't worry about it now. Who knows what they're going to want in 4 years when you're ready to get your job.
That's true. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Good. One worry off your table. Okay, off your plate. Good.
Go ahead, Leah.
I have a more kind of broader question around macro social work, and there's the historical context around social work, especially as it has become more of an academic discipline, is that macro has been kind of left behind almost. And so why do you think that is, and why do you think there continues to be that struggle to really emphasize macro social work and social work education?
Well, let me just do a sidebar comment. I also belong to, no, it's related, but it's just another path. I also belong to something called the Social Welfare History Group. And if you think macro's been marginalized, history has been marginalized even more. And we recently, so that group has been around since the mid-50s, but and I remember when I was, then after that, when I was in graduate school, they used to put out these mimeograph bibliographies of historical research. And I used to collect them. Now the group has revived itself a couple of years ago, and I joined them, and we put out a bibliography on related to history and relationship to current issues. One on pandemics, one on policing and social work. We're doing one now on Red Scares, which is, if you know, it's anti-communist scares, authoritarian scares that are happening. And we're a small group, but one of the people in that group, Justin Hartley, just finished his PhD and just got a job at Arizona State University. And he and I are starting a group for doctoral students. It's just so funny. This group came up, and we started talking about this last August, or when we have our first meeting. And if any of you are interested, I'll put you on the list.
Is that the one on the 28th?
The 18th.
The 8th, that's, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, you heard about it already, good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I already saw, I have it on my calendar.
And the idea of that is for students who are doing doctoral research for their dissertation. We think that every dissertation should have a historical component. So if you're doing child welfare, where did that problem, what did it look like over time? And that, or someone just may be interested. So if anyone, so it's across the board, and we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know who's going to show up, and we may break into small groups. Anyway, so we have a whole analysis of why history was marginalized, and it's almost the same. The social work literature the social work history literature has a discussion of why policy, they called it policy, not macro, policy was marginalized. And part of it was the field was influenced very much by psychoanalysis and psychology. Even before that, what's his name? Porter Lee said social work wasn't a profession, it didn't have a skill or a knowledge base. So they went, it's a standard story, but it makes more sense now when you ask this question, because then they went into trying to get that, and we're very derivative. So we went to psychology. And then during the 50s, you had McCarthyism. So anything social planning, social change, people were afraid to open their mouths. They were afraid to do anything. And social work came into its adolescence and early adulthood before the 60s, okay? And so much of what the interpretation we have is much of what happened is that it grew up, its socialization took place in a period of silencing dissent in the area. And so to protect itself, the macro forces were marginalized. They were also much smaller to begin with, and they tend to be a little more radical, they're more political, let's put it this way. And so, but the McCarthy era had a huge, and many, in our Red Scare bibliography, we've gone into the archives and so on, many social work faculty, not many, but more than a few social work faculty had lost their jobs because of talking like I'm talking now. So both and the same thing, there used to be a lot of historical dissertations and then they died down. So but meantime, the clinical work also allowed social work to move away from the poor, who they were identified, to the middle class, who they thought, and then those who wanted private practice. So all those things that you're shaking your heads at, so all of those things, converge at different times over time. So for that reason, I mean, did I tell you I studied CO? Did I mention that, didn't I? And I studied policy in my doctoral program. But so these macro organizations started to form maybe 10 or 15 years ago, not the history group, but these ones I mentioned before that I really urge you to join. Because people who taught policy, there were one or two of them on every faculty, and they were lonely. There's no one to talk to, no one to support them, and no one to mentor them in the doctoral programs. So one of the things we're doing with this history group, why we're convening doctoral students, is if you don't produce faculty, If you don't train doctoral students in history and macro, who's going to teach in the master's program? So you are the future teachers of the master's programs. Whatever you learn to do, we want the schools we want you to be able to teach that. And if there are a lot of people, a lot of good ones, it's going to put pressure on the schools to bring more this content into the clinic, to hire more people. Some schools already do, some schools don't, some do a lot, some do a little. So you can join a quasi macro movement by signing up with these organizations. You don't have to do anything. You could just listen, or you can volunteer for it. It's all volunteer. You could volunteer for something that interests you, you know, put a couple of hours a month in or whatever, but you start to hear this, the kind of just what we're talking about and how we're trying to manage the marginalization of macro. And I have to say, we've had a lot of success. It's not just spitting in the wind. We have the Special Commission to Advance Macro Practice. We have the Council on Social Work Education asked us to produce a guide to macro practice, which they now have. The NASW asked us to work with Oxford Press to put an encyclopedia, the first ever encyclopedia of macro social work, which is about to come out. And there are 10 different action groups. They're working on licensing. They got the Department of Labor to describe social work in a way that wasn't just clinical. You know, and so we're rebuilding, we're starting to rebuild the infrastructure, a macro infrastructure within social work. And to me, it's very exciting. I like the word infrastructure because it's not just actions, it's a structural thing that hopefully will have a lasting power. And then the voting as social work sort of is connected to that. We're trying to, it's another macro project. So, and when we go to the APM and have our booths up there, there's always someone who wanders over with the ISP booths and says, you know, I'm so lonely at my school. And we all say, yes, we are too. And so it's a home. So you have, if you don't want to be marginalized, you got to come into this, come to the table and help grow this part of our profession. Anyone else? Come on. Don't be shy. You see, I'm not shy. I don't bite.
I think I'm just taking some time to process everything you said, because I think
Take your
even
time.
I did a lot of work in Flint, and that's where I got my bachelor's in social work. And so hearing you say all these things about macro is very validating to me. So I don't even know where to begin. I guess one thing I was curious about, because you discussed about talking about the Voting in Social Work initiative, right? And you also talked about kind of like a lot of the work you did in your at Yale, right, to get people to vote.
No,
So I'm curious.
that was unionization. It wasn't voting.
Oh, my bad, unionization. But like, I mean, I guess I see a connection there, and I'm curious how you think about how you approach that community organizing and translating that into voting, if that makes sense.
Well, union organizing, mobilizing social workers, it's all organizing. And you know, in union organizing, I was much younger then. I could pass for a student, so we could roam the halls and talk. We were organizing secretaries and clerical staff, so that was easy. We did fairly good given the times and resources we had, and then organizing. Wherever I am, I do something catches me, and whether it's something in my school or something. But so the Voting in Social Work is another next big national campaign. So we're organizing. We don't go door to door. One, it's a national, and two, COVID. But we work through the schools, and so we have a trickle down theory. So we have all the major social work organizations have endorsed us. We had to do organizing through email and phone calls and Zoom calls to get CSW, NASW, the clinical social workers, the Latino social workers, the forensic social workers, the perinatal social workers, Social Worker Action Alliance, ISP, all of them to, if you look at our flyer, then we get them. So then we had to work with them to get them equipped to organize at their schools. Like next week, we're having a meeting, a call to deans and directors. We're having 5 deans and directors talk about what they've done at their schools to support this work, because there's some deans that are very proactive and others that don't do anything. So we're trying to mobilize the deans. So we've used webinars. So you use the tools that are available, but you can't get change by thinking about it only, writing about it only, speaking about it. You got to do something about it. And so there are lots of different ways to organize it, and Zoom has made it easier for this kind of organizing, because we can reach around the country, we can reach all the schools. There are organizations of deans, organizations of doctoral students, they know us, we know them. And partly some of us in the leadership have been around the field for a long time and with somewhat of loudmouth. So they've gotten, we have some visibility because we speak out, or just because of our research. So, so that's how to use relationships, how to use connections, who should talk to who. Those are all organizing skills that, and keeps me happy. If someone wants to, I was curious. I thought you might have questions about how to do a macro dissertation. And I don't have a simple answer for that. But if anyone wants to talk about that, because there are tons of different ways to do it, but it's very easy to, in social work, especially if you do interviews, to end up doing stories about individuals, which are fascinating, but you don't get to the macro questions except through the individual experience. And that's not bad, but there are ways to ask the question. I'll give you an example. In our study of managerialism, we did as a survey. We had 3,000 social workers respond to our survey, which was huge. It took 6 months. We got 3,000. We used social work organizations in New York City to distribute it to their staff and so on. Because we were interviewing, we wanted to influence the experience of the workers. But what we asked them what was going on in their agency. We made our unit of analysis the agency as opposed to their stress. And we got some stuff about their health and their stress, but we figured out ways to ask questions about that relate to questions of productivity, efficiency, accountability, and standardization, which are the 4 components of managerialism that show up in universities. I had a couple of students do it, study social work programs, but also in the nonprofits and the public sector. So anyway, it's just an alert that, because the people around you, if you're in dissertation seminars and so on, they're not going to try to push you, but their suggestions will move you away inevitably from macro, because you're the only 2 macro people in the room. And in your classes. And you try to bring something up and they'll say, well, what about, something else that'll take you back to an individual case study. If you want to do that, I'm not saying that you can study child welfare through individual stories and do a good macro thing, but it's a little different than getting to something about how the agency works, as opposed to how the person in the agency works. So that's one issue. Or to pick sometimes quantitative, simple surveys will give you more breadth, more macro, because they let you get 100 people, 1,000 people to talk about the same thing, and then you have more power to generalize. Anyway, so there probably are many other things that you might have thought of or that I might think of, but just it's an alert. You have to keep your macro hat on really tight in social work, because everything is moving you. The resources of grants and the NIH grants that everybody wants, the schools want. That's another managerialism thing. High impact scores on journals, productivity for tenure, all those things that you're suffering are managerialism working its way through the university, and so you can't do anything. If you want to fight managerialism, you can't do that by yourself, but we're trying to do it with our research. We offer a very strong critique of it in our research about the privatization of social work. And we were also able, some of the questions that were posed to me were about racism. So I'll just mention something about that, because long before the society became, distinctly interested in questions of race, many of us are working on it. I grew up in the civil rights movement. So my first book was called Regulating the Lives of Women, Social Welfare Policy from Colonial Times to the Present. And that was a feminist analysis of the welfare state, how the welfare state treated women. But it always had a race, class, and gender analysis. So I had chapters. You couldn't talk about that without knowing what was happening to, it was about poor women, women of color. So, but increasingly we're more, I did that just out of just who I was, but now increasingly we use a more conscious race lens to do things. So all my work, I always describe my work as doing that. So one of our studies, a managerialism study, we asked a lot of demographics. We had about 40% of our sample were workers of color, partly because that's who social work is increasingly these days, and partly because we had public sector, child welfare workers and so on in our sample, because we had the help of the public unions. They helped us distribute our survey. So, so we were able to compare, just a very simple comparison of how the workers of color and the white workers, almost all were women, so it was very hard to do a gender analysis, a comparative, were different. And we didn't plan to do that, but we were doing this part of the analysis after the George Floyd was murdered. And so we started to say, hey, what does our study tell us about that? And so we had this data, and we said, manage it. We had developed a score called an agency's commitment to managerialism based on how the workers described it. And so high managerialism agencies had one set of characteristics which were the worst, and low managerialism agencies had better working conditions and people were happier. So low managerialism was a protective factor, but we did it by race, and we found out that the workers of color were concentrated in the high managerialism agency. They had more complaints. My supervisors don't respect me. My coworkers don't pay attention to me. And a whole bunch of other things. And so we were able to, and it was startling. We had a paper in social work, I think last year's, systemic racism and social work agencies. And we were able to do that. So I'm just giving you examples how my mind works, to give you an example of how your mind can work. But, and because I got it, Josh had said some people not on this call necessarily were interested in this question. I was really glad to hear that, because you really can't talk about macro without talking about race, class, and gender. So you just want to figure out a way to bring it into your studies, maybe not all of them equally. Like when regulating the lives of women, it was much more about women. But when I talked about women, I never just talked about white women. So it wasn't exactly an equal analysis like I might do today, but it was white women, and I made sure that I covered other women in that. So, and that takes consciousness that you have to have for yourself, and it takes more work. Anyway, enough on that. But it's so really work hard to get a good solid macro question. And I'm happy to talk to you at this meeting or another meeting. Like if someone wants to raise their research, I'd be happy to do that. I mean, if you want to spend time, that's one reason I'd be happy to come again if there's time, and ISP would want it, but I could, just talk about, we could do a case study, someone could say, this is my research, and we could do a sort of a mentoring project to see, okay, what do you have to do to make this more macro? Or what's right and what's good, what's not working for this. And I thought that might be a helpful thing to do on occasion, not, whenever someone felt like it. And I guess, my interest in doctoral students has grown because of what I told you before. I just recently realized if we don't get you doing this, we're sunk. So to put it in professional language, yeah. So it's so I'm happy to spend some of I have a little more time in my life that I'm not teaching and going to faculty meetings, but I'm still totally engaged in this kind of work. And I think doctoral students is where I'd like to put some of my energy. So that's why I'm doing this. And that's why I'm doing the social welfare history group with the doctoral students. And I recommend even if you don't think you're interested, if you have just a little interest in history, come, because you'll probably meet more macro students there. So I can give you my email address, or instead of having to make Josh do it, I can just tell you what it is.
I will definitely have send out your email address to
Why
everyone.
don't you send it out? Be easy to write it out. Yeah. So just do it soon, because we're starting. We have about 25 people who already signed up. We think we're going to get a lot. We had, just to say, we had the seminar, a webinar we were supposed to go to SWIR, but none of us wanted to go because of COVID. So we decided to have our own roundtable through Zoom. We had 292 people sign up. We were stunned. About half of them, less than half, about a third came, which is usually what happens, just like here. And so there's a lot of churning around this stuff, a lot of discontent about marginalization of these kind of questions and things they want to do about it. So you're not alone in feeling what you're feeling. And now ISP is giving you an opportunity to meet people like me and others who are, are in that world and are trying to expand it.
I will definitely take you up on that offer once I get closer to my dissertation.
Well, yeah, and it's also good just to, well, maybe someone else is a little closer, or even you can just take an idea, say, I think I might want to do this, and we can all brainstorm. Anyone can. You don't have to think don't worry about sounding smart or finished, because that's not, if you're finished, then we can't do much because you have too much of a stake in what you're doing. So if you say how to do, like you have an idea, you all have some idea, I think, about what you want to do. Am I right? Do you all have a bit of preliminary research question? Yes, no? You don't have to. I'm just I thought
Yes.
I knew that you might have. That's all. So we can take your preliminary or your almost preliminary research question and play with it. It's just play. It's just a thought game to see where it takes you. I'm not your teacher. I can't do anything.
I just want to throw
oh.
out that it was very validating to hear what you were saying about the macro lens. And I just went through the dissertation proposal process, and me and my chair really we were on very different pages, because I went with this macro lens and she did not. And so, it was a very frustrating process. And just by hearing you speak, I'm now able to name why it was so frustrating in that way. Is that because we were just coming from different lenses of social work practice. But I'm already through the process, so.
Well, you can change. I hope they're not going to do a dissertation you don't want to do. That's the worst thing.
No, it'll still be fascinating and interesting.
10 years of your life. So you want to make sure and it's something you'll be writing about and reading about forever. So, if you've, have you gone through your proposal?
Yeah.
So it's been approved.
It has been, yeah.
People change things along the way. So you're allowed to do that. Things come up. Oh, I discovered this. So, hold on to what you want to do and see if you can squeeze some of it into what your work was, because it depends who your committee is. You have to make sure you get the right committee who will support you in expanding it in this direction if you want. And is this person is your chair of your committee?
Yeah, and I think that's another struggle, particularly at maybe smaller universities that are more generalist, is that there's really not a lot of macro faculty who can be on PhD committees. And so
do they allow you to bring someone in from another department, another school?
They highly deter you from doing that, but you can.
Well, I mean, this is something, if you're an organizer, you got to organize for.
Right.
Not to the point where you get yourself in trouble, but you just try to push it where you can. Sometimes you can't. I'm not saying it's always successful, but if you don't fight for it, and I don't mean fight with a big F, but I mean, just if you don't push for what you want, you're never going to get it. So you might get 10%. Well, that's more than not having 10%.
Just one more thing to put on our agenda for our doc student group that we're going to start.
So what is your group doing in general? So I don't understand. Your group is not just having these meetings. You're meeting outside of these meetings. I mean, I'm curious what you're doing.
So I did allot some time for us to kind of talk about some things after this, but we'll have, how quickly the group is growing, and just kind of, I think we're getting so much out of this conversation. I just don't want to cut it off.
Well, just fill me in and do what you want. I said I want to listen. I'll be happy to listen if you don't mind.
I think I'll try to. I'm thinking of probably switching contacting the group like through email or some other way to, you know, kind of reconfigure and, you know, address some of the things that we had initially set out to do. I think we definitely want to continue highlighting different ISP board members and their experiences. I mean, we're getting so much. I feel like I've seen you talk so much at like the voting and social work stuff, and seeing you kind of converse with everyone here has been so heartening. I don't really know how else to say it. So I want to give more space to other ISP board members to do the same, because I think it is very hard to find like-minded macro social workers generally, and have this conversation about like authoritarianism and neoliberalism. Like,
But you won't get that from most of the other members of the, I'm kind of an outlier on some of these issues. So just, they have other very useful, important things, but, and maybe this they'll agree, but it's not, I've been studying this and most people haven't. So, but I think they have other things to offer that'll be equally useful. I mean, just saying it, but so I'm just, can you just give me a little background on why this group formed and what you hope to do? And besides having a meet the professor come and talk to you, what are you meeting separately? Or, I mean, in other way, I'm just curious what's going on. As you know, I said, I'm interested in how doctoral students are managing themselves these days.
Well, I mean, I must admit I'm a MSW student, so not dictatorial yet. But I was approached. I am how is it? I got my field placement at ISP under Dr. Horner, and so that was one of the big initiatives.
This was your task to organize this group, right?
Yes, because she, like many other macro social workers, were like noticing this kind of like, how do we connect all these different graduate students who are interested in macro, and not do it through this like web of alumni groups that are only localized at like one university. And throughout the summer I've been working with her to kind of realize that, and what would that look like. And so here I am. I don't want to say it's perfect, but it's been very helpful to see people like Leo and Joanna. They've been a part of this since the beginning, and unfortunately there are some other members that I remember meeting quite earlier on that I don't think were able to make it for this particular meeting. But I've been conversing with them and trying to really make this group meet the needs of where a lot of other macro social workers are. And that's why it was really important to have someone like you to do this meet the professor thing, because it doesn't seem like we really get that space to do that. I don't know if Joanna or anyone else wants to say something else about that, but
yeah, so I think as to like what we're actually doing, we're still trying to figure that out. So last meeting was kind of like the first bigger meeting where we talked about kind of some of the goals that we have in mind, or some things that we're interested in that we're hoping to get out of this group. Something that I'm hoping to get out of this group is to develop some sort, I don't know, of a toolkit or something that can basically make it easier to bring the concepts of macro social work to practitioners, like to make them understand like why policy is important, why they need to be like invested in like policy work, how it's all connected, how research is like important for practice as well. And I think part of this meeting now was kind of like about figuring this out, like what we all kind of want to do with it. So I don't think we're exactly sure yet.
Okay, well, that question, I don't want you to reinvent the wheel. That question is the question that the Special Commission to Advance Macro Social Work has been dealing with. It's called, we seek to balance the curriculum. And one of the questions is how we work very hard to bring macro students into our work. So you don't have to figure it out all by yourself. We can just talk to you about it. I mean, we have some experience. You are sort of earlier, current versions of ourselves. You're going through things that we all went through, but we went through it in a slightly easier time. tenure and managerialism, all these things just weren't as stark as they are now. And money and austerity, all these things were just, it was a little softer. Going for upper tenure was terrifying. Passing your comps is all terrifying. It's just that the environment was a little softer on the edges. So if you want to do that, that's what ISP is about, but that's what the Special Commission of Advanced Macro Practice is all about, that. And you can't do that by yourself. You have to develop that infrastructure. That infrastructure has to be available to, in other words, you may learn how to do it. And there are people who learn how to do it one-on-one. So that's great. Doesn't change the field, because you need an infrastructure where the deans and the administrators and the faculty think this is important. And so that's what our job is that's a macro project to solve that problem you're talking about. How to bend the schools a little more to overcome their resistance. And if we had some with CSWE, they invited us to do this macro social work curriculum guide. They paid for it. They brought us to Washington. We had meetings for months. So that's why why I keep saying I'd like to be part of your group somehow, because I can, save you some aggravation and help you get to the right place. And other things you can help me understand what's going on, and help us figure out what we have to do to make things easier or more attractive to macro interested students. So I'm just going to put a plug in for when you plan your activity. See, maybe every other meeting or something. I mean, you may want to have other people come in, but I'd still like to come and listen to another professor talk as much as I can. I might not be able to. So you don't schedule them around me, but I just like to be, a fly on the wall, because I see that as input that I need. And so in exchange, we make it an exchange. If you can give me that space, I can give you my time and my experience. And it may or may not work out, but when you're ready, I'd like to give that a try and see if it would work in some way that works for you all, because each of the things we talked about today could be an hour, 2-hour discussion. And then we could do individual, or, maybe another way to do this is if some people just want to bring their case, they could do that separately. If 5 people want to do that and you don't want it interfere with the larger group, you can have a subgroup do that or something like that. And I could do that. So there are lots of ways. I don't want to intrude, but I really think this might be fun for both of us to do that. So I'm just putting in a plug for what might be useful.
I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. It is 5 minutes after 6. So if you have to log off, that's fine. I know, Susan, I think you've been waiting to ask a question.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's okay. You answered a lot. I was just saying, I'm only 3 weeks into my program. And so we're spending a lot of time delving right now into the history of social work, and actually sort of the historical amnesia, which I think is one of the terms, and just how, social workers were really complacent in things like eugenics and, when they were taking Indigenous children away from their families, and, trying to right now having to reconcile that and offer some kind of, how do you offer an apology? Do you offer, how does that kind of come about? So it's sort of speaking a little bit to what, sort of the things you were talking about.
So that is that a function of your teacher or your program?
That's one of the courses we're in now, the first course we're in. So those are sort of the first, yeah.
You need to find out, I'm just curious, don't find out for me, but sometimes a teacher has an interest like that, and that's what they do when they get a class.
Yeah.
Or else the school mandates it. It's a very different solution to getting that content into the curriculum. Mm-hmm. So it would be curious to see I think
it's more of it's Ann Deepak, Dr. Deepak. And so I don't know, but she, I think the program is they really want to look at human rights and social justice. They really want to examine that. And so I think it's really part of the program. It's not so much her. I mean, she has an interest, but it's really part of the program.
That's great. Then it may be other you may have maybe other faculty who will build on that, or maybe they won't. So it's just hard to get 10 faculty or 6 faculty or how many you have to all do that kind of. That's a very sophisticated analysis. It isn't common in social work. Yeah. It may be more common now, because since Floyd, there's been a lot more consciousness and a lot of more work in the universities to build that kind of knowledge base. But
I think that was really that was what Dr. Mama, that was sort of her vision. I think that was really her vision for this program. So we'll see.
right, but she was able to do it now because of what happened.
Sure.
With someone. That's what I'm saying. More people,
Right.
and then more people speak out and say they want to do this because they're not afraid, because it's a little more sanctioned, positively sanctioned now. So, what courses in the curriculum is CSWE controls a lot of that, but they don't control the content. So my policy course, everyone has this introduction to social policy in their master's course. My course is probably quite different than except that I chaired the social policy areas and I made the syllabus. So they all had to follow my syllabus, more or less. But in other schools, they have to teach the same course, not my syllabus, their own syllabus. And it was day and night. Students used to transfer, students would come to our school from another school and they took policy and they wanted to transfer the credits in. And half the time I couldn't let them because it was nothing like what we did. They hated me for that. But because I could say, okay, you got that and we do this, but I wanted them to have a little bit of something what we had. It couldn't be exact because every faculty puts their own imprint on a syllabus, unless some schools have a master syllabus that everyone has to use for everything. And then I don't know who makes that. But anyway, each question has a long story behind it. Sorry.
I mean, it's been, I don't know, is there anything else really, any other questions? It's been a pleasure, honestly, to have you on the call here and taking all our questions. I really don't know. Is there any last questions before we have to end the call? Because I definitely have to stop the recording because it's very long now. And I'm gonna have
has a question. He just came into the group.
Oh yes, hello Samuel. My bad.
I'm sorry that I came in late, and I am from Kansas, and so I'm kind of an outsider, and I'm friends with Joanna, and so she invited me to be a part of the group, and I currently work in not only in as a private practitioner, but I also work for the government, and I am also involved in public policy advocacy as well. So I'm just here kind of like I'm approaching the group with curiosity.
Yeah, well, good enough. Nice to meet you.
So I guess I just wonder, do you want to set up another meeting then where we kind of figure out what we want to do, how we want to do it and all that later at some other point then?
For sure. Yeah, I definitely, I think I'm definitely gonna, there's definitely a lot to process that I don't have the words to process, to say out of my mouth right now. But yes, I think definitely to meet with the group. It might be, I know we said like once a month we wanted to meet, but with how quickly the group is developing, I think we might have to move it up to twice a month, at least for some of the more interested members who want to be part of the conversation. Because yeah, there's just so many people now, and I want to make sure that I'm helping facilitate the group as best as I can.
So in terms of me, let me know if you want me, if I can be a fly on the wall to any of your meetings, as long as you work the schedule and if I'm free. And then if there's a subgroup that wants to do some of the things like dissertation case study sort of discussions, and I'll meet with them. If everyone doesn't want to do that, but some of you do, we can do that as one of your meetings, but it could be with me separately from the rest of the group, because not everybody may want to do that.
Definitely when I send out this email with the video recording, I'll make sure to include your email. In fact, let me just, I have, why hide the ball now? I can just put in the chat for everyone that's currently here to get your email. And then, yeah, so if you guys have any questions, you don't have to wait on me to, have the video process after the Zoom call and then, have that take its time and upload it. Here, let me put it.
Even if you go to the Silverman School of Social Work, if you lose this, I think my email is still up there on the Silverman, as I still listed as a faculty, at least recently. They never update their website, so I'm still on it.
There we go.
That's it. That's right. IAB, RAMOV. Don't ask me how I got that. I'll save that story for another time.
All right, well, with that, I don't think, and last call for questions. I don't want to take the space away from anyone else, but
Poor Josh, he's trying to end this meeting gracefully.
I like, we went all sorts of different paths, and I don't even, like, there's no like good conclusion to end this awesome meeting. I gotta say.
You can use the clock. The time, you can say we've run out of time, so
Oh, but that just feels.
I'll help you end this meeting. 'Cause, I mean, I'm happy to stay on, but I think people probably want to get off. So, I'll help you. You can just say, we've run out of time, and I know you have someplace else to go, which you already said, and then you.
I know.
But any more questions?
Okay, well, we run out of time. People have someplace else to go. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Truly, and look out for an email from me. I'll have the recording of the session. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Josh, for all that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you all, and I really
Nice
look
to meet
forward
you.
to some more conversation.
Me too. Thank you.
Everyone.
I'll leave first, so you can't, then you'll all leave after.